Morning, church. Thank you so much. Actually, it's absolutely true. I had no idea it was my birthday, and I just looked at my phone really quick to tell my wife I'm about to go up, say a prayer for me, and I seen like a bunch of birthday messages. I'm like, it's my birthday. So I'm 49 today. Yeah. Thank you. Pastor Clay and Celine, I remember it by Celine Dion. I'm very thankful to be invited here, and Ike, I know you're a big part of making it happen, so thanks Ike. But before I get started, I want to say, if you guys aren't aware of what Pastor Clay just did with these chaplains, how important it is for our nation. I mean, our troops have been in 20 years of war. More than that now. It hasn't ended just because of leaving Afghanistan and Iraq. And there is nothing more essential for our national security than to make sure the men and women in uniform have the spiritual resiliency they need to protect our nation. And so many people have forgotten that in our military and in our leadership, but our chaplains are on the front line making sure, fighting all the politics and all the different things. They're on the front line making sure that our troops are not only spiritually resilient to be able to fight the wars that our nation fights and defend people around the world that can't defend themselves, but to make sure they come home whole and well to be husbands and wives and fathers and mothers and come back to communities like this. So it's such a big deal to see a church that recognizes the importance of that, endorsing these chaplains through the Pentagon, which is such a big deal. And I know it's not an easy process to do. And so I thank you for you guys as a church doing that. Thank you, Pastor Clay, for doing that, and for you guys serving our troops. So it's awesome. So I think we're doing something that Pastor Clay said we never did before. I'm going to give the first part of this message. I'm going to give my testimony, which kind of captured in this message called Get Off the X. And then you guys go get a break, get a glass of water, and come back in. If you had lunch plans, you might want to cancel them. Because I'm saving the better part of the message for the second service. So it's not a replicating service. It's two separate services. And the second one's called Tear Off the Roof. And it's going to be more of a challenge for all of you based on it. So I know that maybe every seat looks full. I'd be happy. I'll give you my seat, like if we had standing room only, and let's do both messages. The second one is what I'm most excited about. But I'll start off with the first today, this morning, with my message, Get Off the X. And I think it's always best to start with a war story. People love hearing war stories from veterans. So my time in the military was a little bit different. I went into special operations, it was a lifelong dream. I became a Force Recon Marine. And that I tried out for what's called the JSOC Task Force, a Joint Special Operations Command Task Force. For those that don't know what that is, all of our Tier 1, premier Special Operations units are there. Task Force Orange, SEAL Team 6, Delta Force. And so I tried out, got accepted there, and subsequently did 8 deployments as part of a JSOC Task Force. And huge, one of the biggest honors of my life outside of standing on a pulpit on Sundays and sharing God's Word, to be able to do that job. When I went there, I did a job that I didn't even know existed. It's called an AFO, Advanced Force Operator. And so what Advanced Force Operators do is you imagine when you think of a Tier 1 Special Operations unit, you think of a bunch of guys that look like gorillas with rifles kicking in doors and going into rooms or caves and shooting bad guys in the face. That's what you kind of think about with Special Operations, those top units. But my job as AFO is to make sure those guys would get there. So best way to describe it is more like an undercover type of role. And you work as singleton by yourself, and you embed with local nationals. You live with local nationals. You don't live on a base. You learn the language and blend into the culture to go ahead of those units to do all the clandestine infrastructure to get those assaulters on target, capture or kill the bad guys, and then make sure they safely get off the target. And then you stay there and live that way. So I did all 8 of my deployments as AFO. I got a picture here of what we might have looked like. I have one without the black glasses there. So that's kind of like everyday life. That was actually in Kabul. And so the story I want to start off telling you is it was myself and this guy, Aziz, who you'll hear a lot about Aziz today, who started off my interpreter and then became my primary teammate. and a Navy SEAL named Dave. And the three of us were in a Toyota Prado, which is like a Toyota 4Runner. And we were driving in Kabul, the capital of Kabul, on a road called Jalalabad Road. We're heading in the eastern side of the city. And we were in plain clothes like this, and probably didn't have much for weapons, like a pistol tucked in my waistband. And we were definitely not looking for any trouble because, if the Taliban did come into Kabul at that time, they were either going to blow something up or start a fight or something. So the three of us, that wasn't our job to go out and fight Taliban at that time. So we're driving into the city, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw a Hilux pickup truck, a Toyota pickup truck, loaded with guys that looked like the Taliban. I mean, they all had very stereotypical, big beards and tribal clothing on, a tactical vest. They had a AK-47 assault rifles, every one of them did. We even seen an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, being held up out of the back of that truck. And the truck was loaded with guys. We always had a joke to kind of explain how many guys were in the truck. How many Taliban can you fit in a pickup truck? So the answer is one more. Right? They pile in this truck. Usually there's one sitting on the roof, and I'm like, man, I hope these guys aren't following us. So I did a technique you learn in training called deviating your route. So I'm on Jalalabad Road, and I make a right, and I start making a block to see if they're following us. So I make a right, and I make a left, and they're still following. I'm gonna make that last left. They're still following. I turn right on my original route, and when I did that, that technique it confirms they're actually following me. It also let them know that I knew they were following me. So the kind of gig was up, and it started a pretty aggressive pursuit. They started trying to run me off the road. I made a decision to go into the city of Kabul to lose them in the busyness of the traffic. Now, I don't know, we're in Loveland, but I mean, you sometimes go down to Denver, you think the traffic's bad. I promise there's nothing on third world traffic. If anybody's been third world country with a military or ministry trip, like third world traffic, no stoplights, no street signs, everything's just congested so bad. And so Kabul, I have a picture here, but it actually doesn't even do it justice. This is Kabul downtown. It's just chaos. There's goats and people selling stuff on the street. And so I'm trying to lose them through this traffic, and it backfired on me. I made it to this major intersection called Masood Circle. And as I got to Masood Circle, the traffic started to congest, and everything began to kind of stopped. And I didn't have anywhere to go. There was this little pathway I was trying to squeeze through. And somehow this truck full of those fighters got about 20 yards in front of us and cut us off and blocked off that egress that I was looking for. And I remember real vividly, like the passengers getting out the back. A few guys jumped out the back with their rifles. But probably my clearest memory is the passenger stepping out of the door. You can immediately tell he was in charge. He opened the passenger door. He stepped out. What was kind of eerie is he even took the time to close his door behind him. So he wasn't in a hurry. He was like in charge and control. And he turned to me. He had his AK-47 in one hand. In his other hand, he looked at me and gave me a hand signal to stop my vehicle. A very bad situation, right? In my training experience, this is called being on the X. There's a couple of rules you learn in training about the X. Rule number one, you have to be able to recognize that you're on the X, right? You got to know you're in a bad situation. You can't be naive to it. Rule number two is pretty simple. You have to get off the X. You have to move. If you stay there, something bad's going to happen. And in my training experience in the military, we train for every possible scenario for whatever could go wrong. That's kind of what makes the military really efficient. Whatever your job is, what are things that could go wrong, and you train and train and train for every possible scenario. And I actually train for this. Every year we go to a place called Bill Scott Raceway in West Virginia, and we use your taxpayer money to have a blast, like crashing cars, doing reverse 180s and J-turns and all the fun stuff you see on TV. Like you literally just destroy a car. They drag it off with a tow truck and they bring you a new one. And it's a blast. And they have these, so one of the scenarios is a roadblock situation. You execute what's called a ramming technique. You line up the frame of your vehicles with the axle of the other one, and you hit the vehicle and you wait for a jolt, but it doesn't happen. Like the vehicle just flies out of the way. So I just did exactly what I was trained to do. Everything kind of kicked in that moment. I hit the gas, I aimed my vehicle towards theirs, and I lined my vehicle up. And when I hit that truck, it was probably one of my favorite memories of Afghanistan, because as it spun out of the way, I seen little Taliban fighters flying out of the back. A few of them jumped right before I hit it, because I think they thought I wasn't going to do it. And they flew out, and the truck flew out of the way, and it left me a perfect pathway to get off that intersection. And as I'm driving off that pathway, there was one more obstacle. There was like this 100-year-old policeman. He had like a perfect uniform on. If anybody's been to a third world country, like these traffic cops, they'll be assigned to intersection, and their whole life is they're so proud of it. They like own that intersection. That was this guy. He saw me, he's blowing his whistle. He's like, beep, beep, trying to stop me. And I was getting out of there, so I was going to run this dude over. And when he saw I was going to run him over, he jumped on my team. He smiled, gave me a thumbs up, and started blowing his whistle, stopping cars, directing traffic. and got me off the intersection and probably saved my life that day. He's the hero of this story, really. And you know, I say this, I come here to say this morning. If we would have stopped in Masood Circle that day, if we would have stopped on the X, we would have put up a heck of a fight. But the truth is, we likely would have been killed or taken. You know, I'm here this morning to tell you, you don't have to go to Afghanistan or combat to find yourself on the X. Like every one of us throughout life, in times of our life, maybe some of you right now, if not, it's probably coming. Or you could think of a time recently that you've been stuck on the X. And through my own story and through the last 14 years of dealing with hundreds of thousands of military warriors, essentially stuck on the X, I really learned it comes down to one thing. It's a choice that we alone have the power to do. That's how God orchestrated it, to choose whether we're going to stay on the X in our life and die, either literally or metaphorically, or if we're going to get off the X and move forward. You know, I'm so thankful that God didn't just create us, but he created us, each of us, with a plan and purpose. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future." That promise is you know, inspiring, and we see it on shirts and wristbands, but the truth is that promise doesn't exempt us of being on X. What it says is when we're on X in our life, God still has a plan and purpose for us. It doesn't mean that we're not going to face hardships. It means that when we're on the X, if we move forward, trusting that God's plan and purpose is in our life, that we're going to land in the right place. And, you know, it's easy to stand up here in retrospect and talk about my life and times I found myself on the X, but the truth is I haven't always known that promise or trusted that promise in different times of my life. I can think of a different time that I found myself on the X after that moment in Afghanistan, and it was coming home after my 8th and last deployment, being diagnosed with PTSD, dealing with anxiety and depression, in a real battle with taking my own life. The only difference is that time, I didn't recognize I was on the X. I didn't want to admit I was on the X because of my own pride or shame, and so because I wouldn't recognize the situation I was in or admit it, I couldn't do the second thing, was to get off the X. I chose to stay there for a period of almost 3 years, and it almost cost me everything. My hardships did not begin as a combat veteran. Like many veterans, like many people in our country, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. My father was a Vietnam veteran, and every time I get to speak, I always thank the Vietnam veterans at this Indian here for your service and welcome you home, because of the way you were treated coming home, my generation was treated much better. And so I thank the Vietnam veterans. My family actually extends all the way back almost 85 years of service. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. I served in Afghanistan 8 times. Both my sons, one's still a Marine, another one is an Afghanistan veteran as well as a Marine. So we have a long history of service, but the most influential to me was my father's. Coming home from Vietnam as infantryman, and his life was just broken. He was a dysfunctional human being. He was angry, violent, a lot of alcohol, drugs, and women. And so I grew up in a home in that environment. And if anybody's grown up in a home like that, you know, the siblings get really close. There's a lot of physical abuse in my home. I don't mean spankings with a belt. I have 2 sons, so I'm kind of cool with that. But I mean fist-to-face physical abuse, and that's not okay. And you know, my father was so abusive to me and the women that were in his life and my brother, and so me and my brother got really, really close. He was a year older than me, and I lived in southern Louisiana. I mean, like really southern Louisiana, like mud between your toes, like the swamp people. And so we were out in the woods in a swamp. We played military, you know, as a kid, and we were about 13 years old. We came up with this idea that we were going to join the military to escape that lifestyle and have a fresh start. And we were watching this. I remember watching this video. I think it was and this Navy SEAL was coming out of the water. He had like twin 80 scuba tanks on his back. His face was painted green. He had a scuba mask on and a regulator in his mouth, and he like this boonie hat on, and it's like seaweed hanging off him. He's coming out of the water, and I remember seeing that, thinking like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do, but I don't want to be in the Navy. So it was something about being a Marine. I guess dysfunctional as my dad was, there was something about being a United States Marine that made him happy. He had only served 2 years, but you see these guys that served 2 years in the military in World War II, and they still wear the hats all the time, and the Vietnam veterans, they wear the hats, and there's something about that, his time as a Marine, that is as miserable as a person it was, it made him stand taller and prouder and happy, and I'm like, man, if it can make that guy happy, like, I want a piece of that. And so something about being a Marine, so I started reading these books about these recon Marines in Vietnam, because I was like, that's kind of the Marine Corps version of the SEALs, and Force Recon in Vietnam, 3rd Force Recon in Vietnam, which is cool because I ended up serving that unit later. And I was just so inspired by that. My brother and I, at 13 and 14 years old, started running and swimming and preparing for that. About a year into that, tragedy hit my family, and my brother was shot and killed. He was the closest person to me at the time, so as a kid, I went in this deep depression. What I had left as a family dissipated. I ended up living on my own when I was like 15 years old. And when it came time to go in the Marine Corps, I was like in such good shape because I'd been training all these years, and I was like kind of lifelong athlete as well. But I probably wasn't going to graduate high school. And so I went to this Marine Corps recruiting office, and I met this guy named Staff Sergeant Ronald Brown. This is 30 years ago, by the way. Most people remember their recruiter's name because they hate them. I remember my recruiter's name because I'm just so grateful that I walked in his office and told him my situation. And I said, this is my dream. I'm probably not going to graduate high school. And he helped me write a hardship letter to the Marine Corps to help me get in without even a high school diploma. And I was 17 years old. And I still to this day don't know how that was possible. I signed the infantry contract, which is his motivation was probably he needed someone to sign an infantry contract. And I started in the Marine Corps, 17 years old, without a high school diploma. I made a promise to him that I would, after infantry school, I'd get a GED. It wasn't contractual. And I remember going to 29 Palms, Copper Mountain College. I got my GED. And all these years later, I got an MBA from New York Tech. I'm about to get my second one from Harvard. And I'm not too proud of Harvard. I'm not a big fan of the school. But I say that to say, like, and I always joke and say, like, I can't spell MBA, but I got one. But the truth is, like, I'm just so thankful for the military, and these guys can recognize what it gives young men and women in our country a second chance. Because when you go in the military, it doesn't matter where you came from, if you're black, white, Asian, like, it doesn't matter if your daddy was rich or poor, if you lived in a ghetto or a mansion or a trailer park. When you stand in the Marine Corps, you stand on these yellow footprints and you raise your hand and you make this commitment, like, you get the chance to pave your own trajectory. It doesn't matter nothing else matters except what you're going to do with it. And some people ruin their lives because of it. Some people make bad choices, and some people embrace it. And so somehow at the young age of 17, I just made this decision to embrace this opportunity because I didn't feel worthy of it because of my circumstances. And I just leaned in. And there's so many great jobs in the military, but of all the jobs, like, I got to do the one that I feel like fit me best. A year in, I became a reconnaissance Marine. I later tried out to become a Force Recon Marine. I went to all the schools, military free fall school and combat diver school and every school you can think of. But I was doing this during a peacetime military, and so I was like so pumped to actually go to war during a peacetime military, which may sound crazy to some of the ladies, like, why would you want to go to war? And the only way I know how to describe it is like, imagine being all dressed up and all dolled up to go out somewhere, but you have no place to go. That's what it's like in the military. You get all trained up and you're like, I want to go do it. I want to go do my job. Unfortunately for me, that came at the cost of 9/11. I was a sergeant at 3rd Force Recon Company. I was the military free fall team leader. So I was in a special operations job that when I was sitting down on the couch and watched that first plane fly into the World Trade Center buildings, I'm like, I can't believe some idiot just crashed a plane into a building. And then when that second plane hit, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that was intentional. Like, we're going to war. And I knew in that moment, like, my life was never going to be the same. And by the way, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're going to war. I remember going to my unit and everyone was like, hey, what's up, sir? Like, let's go do this. The whole military is that way. I mean, if you remember, those of us older, if they remember, you drive down the street, you see nothing but American flags. There was no political parties or division. It was like, we felt united as a nation, and the military had this sense of duty to go rectify what happened. And so I wanted to deploy so bad, and my unit was ready to go, and then we got stood down to support another unit, and so we're going to individuals. So I had this opportunity to try out for this task force. I got picked up, and then I did those 8 subsequent deployments in that way. And of all the bad things that happened in that, through those 8 deployments, I lost 15 friends. I had a lot of terrible things happen to me personally. I will never, ever regret the opportunity to serve in that capacity because it was one of the greatest privileges of my life, not just for our national security, but for those people in Afghanistan that we don't ever hear about, those 20 million women and little girls who right now are sexually enslaved because we're not there anymore, and the 20 years of freedom that we gave them to become teachers and doctors and judges and journalists. I will never regret the opportunity to be part of that. I remember landing in Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night. That was my first time actually landing in a war zone. I didn't fly with my unit because of my job. I flew alone. There was a few other SEALs on the plane with me that didn't know. And I was supposed to wait on a tarmac of the runway to meet my point of contact. And so I had like this hour and I was out there just by myself at night. And Bagram Air Force Base, this is 2003, it was pretty primitive at that time. So I walked to the edge of the base and there was these called HESCO barriers, the earth-filled barriers, and it had some concertina wire, razor wire on top of it. And I had this moment to where I realized the reality of what was taking place, that I was actually in war. And a lot of people might have had this before, where you got something really big in your life and you're waiting for it to come, and that moment's kind of inching up, and then that moment arrives, and you like the reality of like, wow, this moment's actually here. And that was for me in that moment. I had been 10 years in special operations, training. And now I'm actually in combat, and I'm thinking on the other side of this HESCO barrier, somewhere out there in the dark, is the Taliban, the enemy. And over the next few months, I'm going to try to kill them, and they're going to try to kill me. That's what's really about to happen. Like, am I prepared to do what the Marine Corps, sent me here to do? Am I prepared to do this job? And in the military, as Pastor said, I spoke to about 500,000 troops in the last 14 years. One of the things I speak primarily on, and this allows me to speak on my faith to secular mandatory audiences, by the way, is I speak on the 4 pillars of resiliency: mind, body, spirit, and social. The reason the military is mandated to speak on these things, and the chaplains oftentimes can't really speak on their spiritual pillar. They kind of sometimes have to speak generally. But me, I can give my personal testimony. So this allows me to go places like Marine Corps boot camp and speak personally about my faith. And it's just a huge privilege to do that, and God's given me the position to do that, and say it even in these secular environments. But for me, standing on that, looking out into the dark, I would have inventoried myself, because that's kind of how my mind works. Like, am I ready to do this? I probably didn't go through the 4 pillars exactly, but mind, like mentally, I knew my job. I had the right perspective. I was motivated. Physically, I was in the best shape of my life. Socially, I'm with the premier special operations unit in the world, in my opinion, and probably just period. I was in the premier special operations unit, so socially, I'm surrounded with the right people. And spiritually, well, I had the word Christian stamped on my dog tag, but it was probably not much deeper than that. In fact, I had a pretty shallow, surface-level faith. I would have said I was a skeptic at that time in my life, and the more time I spent in Afghanistan, the more skepticism I had. My wife would be like, I'm praying for you. I'm like, what are you praying for? Like, God's not here. Like, if there's a God, he's not here. And I really confused the fact that being in an evil environment, when you're in Afghanistan, and it literally, you could feel the sense of like evil, and I mistaken that for the absence of God. And I thought that God wasn't there, because you could just literally feel the weight of the evil, especially living out, I would live in Taliban villages and stuff like that. Like, I felt this presence of evil there, and so I'm mistaking that for the absence of God. And so I think in my mind, looking back in retrospect, I think I made this very conscious decision that people make in war and people make outside of war, especially men in the American culture today, to feel like I had to choose between being a warrior and being a person of faith, right? My masculinity versus my Christianity. I felt like I had to make a choice. And as a young, 30 years old. Which is probably pretty young for now. It's 49. I look back, that's young, right? I had to make this decision, which one I was going to do, and of course I'm going to choose being a warrior, right? I could do this Christian part. I could do it later when I get older. There'd be time in my life to do it. Right now, I need to be a warrior. My job, I'm going to have to manipulate people, lie to people. People are going to die because of decisions I'm going to make, and not just bad guys, by the way. Like as an AFO, you're manipulating local nationals and it's just part of the collateral damage of the job. You learn that. So I'm like, I could do that later. Like right now, I need to be violent. I need to be mean. I need to put my conscience away to be able to make these hard decisions. And so I deliberately made a decision to put God out of my life to be this warrior. And by the way, I'll say that that's probably no greater lie of the enemy than that. For men in this world, I feel like they have to choose between their masculinity and Christianity. Because I'll tell you, looking back, there's no more of a stronger man on the battlefield of combat or battlefield of life than men of God. If not for men of God, then who's going to make the difficult decisions to stand up and fight for the most important things in this world? I wish I would have knew that because I made that deliberate decision to remove God out of my life, I almost lost everything dear to me. That decision led me to have this giant hole in my heart over the next few years that I feel with anger and rage and a bitterness, and like this real darkness took over me. And I started to just get like this sense of like, I'd say almost like aggressiveness, but it was just like this real, just like frustration, deep frustration, just constant anger. And everything I've seen in the culture of Afghanistan, the sexual molestation of little boys and little girls and the evil stuff that the Taliban would do to people, like I just had this hatred inside of me. And it felt like it worked really well because the Afghans I worked with, they had been subject to it worse than me. They had been impressed by that. And so they had it. All the guys I worked with, we had this thing, if everybody's heard the story, Roberts Ridge, that was one of our guys from our command, from SEAL Team 6. And when Roberts fell out the back of a helicopter trying to save a crew chief, he fell on the ground and fought the Taliban. He was by himself, fought the Taliban until every round was going in his gun. And then when they got to him, they cut off his privates and shoved it in his mouth. And I know that sounds gory, but I'm trying to give you the perspective of what happened here. And they executed him. And when that happened, our command was like, oh, that's the rules that we're playing by? And that was the mentality of my command. So it was just this real like kind of hatred, and it was driven. It felt like it worked really well in combat. But one, it's not sustainable. And two, it's not necessary because, by the way, we're the good guys. And so being in Afghanistan and then 24 hours later being home with my family was not a light switch that I could flip off. I was still this angry dude coming home, and now I'm supposed to be like a husband and father and Mr. Rogers, the friendly neighbor. Like I was still this angry, intense dude. And I come home excited to see my family, but in moments I would like be screaming at my kids and my wife like a Marine Corps drill instructor, slamming doors, punching holes in the wall. And by the way, that's not my personality. Anybody that knows me, I'm like a really kind of kind and gentle person. I have like a really kind of like easy personality. And so my wife and kids were not used to that. But I would just fly off the handle over nothing. And I was just so frustrated. I remember one time I was coming home. My daughter was so excited that Dad was going to be home for her birthday. And my daughter, birthdays is really important to my daughter. I didn't even know there's such thing as half birthdays till I had a daughter. And so it's so important to her. And her having her birthday party, and she didn't like the icing on her cake. She's super opinionated. She's 26 now, even more so, right? But she didn't like the icing on her cake. Something super simple. And I flipped out, and I grabbed my little girl's birthday cake and picked it up in front of everyone. I threw it against the wall and destroyed my little girl's birthday. And I remember in that moment thinking, like, who does something like, what kind of dad behaves that way? But instead of like admitting I was wrong in that moment, my mentality was everyone's an idiot, right? And I have to let them know. Like my daughter, like, oh, you don't like the flavor in your birthday cake? Like, what about some little girl in Afghanistan that would never even see a birthday cake in her whole life? Like how disrespectful, so I was just putting all that on them. And I don't want my daughter to know about what goes on in Afghanistan, but I was putting all that on them. And I realized I was so out of control. So instead of correcting that behavior, I made a decision to just distance myself from my family and just put a wall up between me and my family. And that was probably one of the first like major decisions in my downfall, because when I distanced myself from my family, I allowed myself to be super cold and callous, and this hardness came over me. Because when you're in Afghanistan and operating, and sometimes when people go through trauma in their life, you have to be able to continue living. And so instead of dealing with that, you kind of just calcify yourself. I mean, I remember when Foster Harrington died, he was one of my first close friends that died. We had served together for 10 years. He was at all three of my kids' births. He served my wedding. Like when he died, like I remember like being so angry and just so broken that he died, because we were like literally like brothers. When you serve with someone in combat, you like live with them every day. You spend more time with them than your spouse than you would with your spouse or your kids. And when he died, like there's no time to grieve. Like he died, I'm grieving, but we have operation to go on tonight. So I have to compartmentalize, put that away, and now we have to go operate tonight. I can't like grieve. And so you just become really calcified because you have to do that. And so that's the place I allowed myself to go, and I never got the help. And that anger and frustration turned into manifesting these physiological symptoms that I never thought in a million years would happen to me. My arms would go numb, my face would go numb. I feel like my throat was swelling shut, and I had like this 1,000-pound weight on me that I couldn't breathe. If you guys don't know, that's signs of panic attacks. And I would never have accepted that I was having panic attacks at that time, because I would have thought like someone that's dealing with this is weak. And so I thought if anyone around me that I worked with in this little special operations team knew that I was dealing with that, those guys would think I was weak, and I'd get pushed out of my unit, which probably wasn't a paranoia or fear. It was probably reality. So I didn't speak up. I didn't say anything. I didn't get the help I needed. And I pushed it down. I figured it'd get better. It got much worse. In fact, there was times in Afghanistan where I'd be in combat and have what's called disassociation, where you feel like your mind separates from your body, almost like you're playing a video game. Everything's kind of slowed down. And so That's operating that way is not only dangerous to me, but other people, but I kept pushing that way. And then I had this moment in our operation where our operation was compromised. We had 10 of our Afghans and 2 Americans that were captured and killed. May not sound like a big of a deal that 10 of them were Afghans, but to me, the Afghans that I worked with, I served more with the Afghans than I did with my own service members. So when they were killed, I ate dinner in these people's homes. I lived in their homes. I played soccer with their kids. Their wives cooked me, my meals and stuff like that. So these are family to me. And when they died and were killed, I felt like they were, I would have died for these guys. They would have died for me. I do believe they did die for me. If I was hanging on by a thread at that moment, that thread was broken. And that subsequently ended up with a compromise on our operation. We had a vehicle bomb driven in our house, killed our guard. Luckily, none of us was home. Killed our guard. More than likely killed our guard. And I was abducted by a foreign intelligence agency. I can't say which one because the Pentagon redacted it in my book, but it's pretty easy to do the math if you read my book, Saving Aziz. So I was abducted by a foreign intelligence agency and was later released. And we still operated after that. After the compromise, we were so focused on our mission, we still operated. And that led to me going on one operation. I came back and realized that I was making decisions that didn't only put me in danger, but put other people in danger as well. And so I finally spoke up and said something. I was brought home, a big process of coming home, of going through interviews and stuff like that. But eventually I was diagnosed with severe chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I didn't even know what PTSD was at the time. But I remember going before that psychologist and being diagnosed with that and how I was feeling at that time. The level of panic I was in, it's very hard to describe unless someone's been there. It would, imagine drowning and being like chained to the bottom of a swimming pool and drowning to death. That level of panic you would be in, drowning to death, but you never die. You're in that state of panic 24/7. That's where I was at. Like, you want to die. You don't want to kill yourself in that moment because you're in survival mode. You want to die, but you would never commit suicide in that moment. That's that level of distress you're in. On top of dealing with this panic, because the medicine they gave me, one felt like it was poisoning me. The other medicine made me feel like a zombie. I didn't want to take the medicine. On top of that, I felt ashamed. Like, imagine me going into the Marine Corps, not even feeling like I'd get a chance to go because I got this opportunity to go in at 17 without a high school diploma. I go into infantry. I make it to recon, which is like an 80% attrition rate. And then the top 25% of those guys get to go to force recon. And then 6 people a year get to represent the Marine Corps at JSOC. I got that opportunity. Then I go to JSOC, become an AFO. Now I'm in this premier operation to get the top 3 bad guys in the Taliban. Like, all this stuff. Like, I never felt worthy of those opportunities I got. I just felt so privileged and honored to get them. And so I felt like I had worked so hard and was so privileged to get this opportunity, and I had failed. And so I was embarrassed. It would be like if I played football and started in like Little League and made it to high school and then Division I in college and then the NFL and then the Super Bowl, which would never happen because I'm 5'4", right? But you get the point. Like, I worked my whole life to get to this place, and I felt like I fumbled the ball. I cost the game. I failed. So I was embarrassed. And my wife and my counselor were trying to find something for me to do to snap me out of it. And they talked me into getting on those wrestling mats and doing a Brazilian-based martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't know if anybody's heard of Jiu-Jitsu before, but it wasn't something new to me, by the way. It wasn't like, hey, you should try this. It was something, I'd say I did it since I was little, but I'm still little. I started when I was 5 years old in martial arts, and I did all the different martial arts you could think, but I've been grappling since I was 5 years old. If you see me up close, my ears are all mangled. So I've been grappling my whole life. I'd already fought professionally in MMA on the side. The military was letting me do it, and I was undefeated, so I was pretty good at it. And so when I got on those mats for the first time and trained, it was like I found a cure. Because you can't think about Afghanistan and grapple at the same time, or your buddy's going to beat you up. You have to be mentally present and focused. That's why I think it's good for you. But you could have a medicine for being sick, and it can be helpful, and you could also abuse that medicine. And that's what I did with jiu-jitsu. I took something good for me, and instead of getting well, I just hit on those mats for 3 years and never got better. And by the way, for those who do martial arts, I love jiu-jitsu. I'm still a 4th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I train every day. And so I'm not speaking bad about it. In fact, like Pastor will say, ministry is probably the most stressful jobs in the world. Chaplains don't know, dealing with military guys. And so when I have a bad day at the office, I go to the gym and I find like some 20-year-old stud, and I choke him out. It makes me feel better. By the way, there's no better time to minister to someone than at jiu-jitsu when you get choking. My dad joke is you choke the hell out of them. But I love jiu-jitsu, but I took something good from me and it never got well. And in the midst of that, I had this kind of real paradox of a scenario where my professional life looked like I rebounded. I opened a school and had like 1,000 students in my school, so we were making money. I started fighting professionally. I ended up being ranked number 6 in the world, won a world title. I got some pictures up here of what some of those moments look like. I won a gold medal at the International Open, and I've won a gold medal at American Nationals in Jiu-Jitsu. Again, I was ranked number 6 in the world. I won a world title in MMA. I ended up being 18-2 as a professional fighter and fought on all the big shows. And so anyone on the surface looking at that would have said, man, this guy's like not dealing with Afghanistan. He's like totally fine. But underneath that false facade of success was still a very broken person. I was dealing with panic attacks. Still, I don't even know how I was functioning as an athlete because I wasn't sleeping. And my home was broken. My wife and I were living in, most of the time I was sleeping in the gym or my kids' room. Even if I was in my bed with my wife, we were just our backs were turned toward each other, just this complete dead marriage. And so, obviously, in a sport like that, there's a lot of women around. It didn't take long for me to step out of my marriage into relationships with other women, full-blown affair. And when my wife found out, we were like, okay, well, we're going to get divorced. That was the solution. No restoration. It was like, we hate each other anyway. We're going to get divorced. It's going to be better. All the lies that people divorcing tell themselves and their kids, like 2 Christmases, no more fighting, all the things that you want to try to do to say to make it sound justified, that's what we were saying. We sold our home, filed for divorce, moved in 2 separate apartments. We signed 2 separate 12-month leases, so we were pretty committed. My wife and I had 2 very different reactions. My wife went into this church. We were going to a big church before, kind of super surface level. Not anything's wrong with big churches. It just, for us, we just did not connect. And we just kind of go check in on Sundays. My wife went to a smaller church to be really connected on a personal level with good people. And every time I stand on a pulpit, I always think of like this left wall over here, because they said that she would go in not just on Sundays, but like multiple days of the week, and she'd stand against that wall and she'd be praying for me. And you might wonder she said she would collapse actually praying, crying for me. You might think like, why would she be praying for me in a moment like that where I was like, totally degenerate to my family and betraying my family? She said she would pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Let me love Chad the way you love Chad. Let me forgive Chad the way you forgave Chad. That's what she was praying for me. Meanwhile, I'm in this apartment, instant bachelor pad. I don't have to deal with this woman anymore. She didn't understand me anyway. And I signed up for this big fight on Showtime, Strikeforce. That's the fight that put me number 6 in the world. And I'm fighting this guy, Humberto de Leon. And if anybody's a fight fan, like when I stood in the middle of that cage and fought Humberto de Leon, it was like the Rocky fight. In fact, I submitted all my opponents. At the time, I was 15-0, had submitted all my opponents, and I had never went to a decision before. But every round, Humberto punched me in the face and knocked me down. I kicked him in the head, knocked him down. We both knocked each other's mouthpieces out. It was just a really good war. And at the end, I remember going to my first decision, and I went to my corner, and I'm like, who won? And they're like, we don't know, it was close. And I thought I lost my first professional fight. And I'm standing in the middle of the ring at Toyota Center, Houston, Texas, 10,000 people in there. And one judge calls it for me. One judge calls it for Humberto, so it's to be a split decision. And then I'm like thinking I just lost. And the third judge calls it for me. My hands raised, 10,000 people cheering. It's kind of deafening being in the middle of that arena, like how loud it is. And then I had this moment where everything got kind of quiet. And you kind of reflect in a moment, like everything got kind of quiet. And I remember thinking, like, all these people here, there's 10,000 people here, not one of them's my wife, Kathy, who had always been in my fights before. And this moment kind of hit me like, man, I just fought so hard for this stupid win on my record, which I love the sport, by the way, but it's just a sport. And meanwhile, I'm not fighting for my family and who's devastated right now. And I left that cage that night with my head up probably low. People would think, like, I just ranked, I'm in top 10 fighters in the world right now. I should be, like, happy. I'm 16-0. But I was left that ring just really, really down and very convicted. And I went back to my apartment. I'm laying in my bed, and this thought came over me of all these people that I blamed for everything in my life. My dad, people in the military, my wife, like all these people I blamed. But the common denominator was me. I was the problem. And so this thought came over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. Right? Maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And if you guys don't know, that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 of our military service members every day. The current VA report says 17, by the way. They don't count car crashes, they don't count jumps, and they don't count overdoses, which is probably count some more. There's another report that says about 50 a day. Now, I don't know what the truth is in there, but I'll tell you this, one is too many. So I don't care about the number. One is too many. I had made the decision. I believed that everybody's life would be better without me. I didn't want to take my life to end my own pain. I wanted to make everybody's life better. And I made the decision. I wasn't going to tell anyone. I didn't want anyone to intervene. I had a Glock 22 pistol, 40 caliber pistol. I'd sit in the floor of my closet in my apartment, and I put my family pictures on the floor around me and look at them kind of like maybe like an eerie way of saying goodbye, and I would try to build up the courage to pull that trigger. I put my gun to my head, and there was something that I believed was divine. Every time I put the gun to my head, I would see a vision like who was going to find me. It's because someone's going to hear the gunshot. You're not going to show up somewhere morbidly, like you're in an apartment. You're going to start smelling like someone's going to come and find you. And so the only other person who had a key to my apartment besides me at the time was my oldest son, Hunter. And I'm like, man, I can't be part of letting my son find me. There's a statistic out there that one in three children from a parent that commits suicide will follow that trend of doing it. So I had heard that, and it was kind of going in my mind. So that would make me pump the brakes in that moment, but I was in such a dark place and believed that was the solution that I was back at it again, either hours or the next day. And in the morning, my wife, Kathy, uninvitedly showed up to my apartment and knocked on the door. And I remember when I heard the knock, I wasn't going to answer it. I was in that closet, I had the pistol in my hand. And then I heard her voice announce herself, and I panicked. I don't know why, because she would never came in my apartment. She would never came in that closet, but I panicked. I actually hid the gun under a blanket. Again, she would never seen it, but I hid it because I was ashamed. And this sounds twisted, but I actually ran to the door because I was so mad that she was interrupting me killing myself, which sounds crazy, right? I was so mad. And I opened the door, and I started just berating her. And she was so calm. By the way, my wife's not a very calm arguer. And usually the opposite. I'm like sane, rational. She goes kind of wild. But in this moment, she was so calm. And I'm like, I'm trying to get her to leave. I'm like, just leave. And she wouldn't leave. And I'm ashamed to say this, but it kind of give you the picture. I've never put my hands there, hit my wife before, but I wanted her to leave so bad that I pulled her purse out of her hand and threw it over the third-story balcony because I was just trying to get her to leave. I remember all stuff flying everywhere. And she just would not leave. And she asked me a question that radically changed my life and probably saved my life that day. She's like, how could you do all these things, right? She saw me become a recon Marine. We met when we were 17 and 18. She saw me go through all these schools and trainings and deployment workups, the stuff we did in Afghanistan. She saw me train for these MMA fights. I would cut 35 pounds. I'm not a big guy. Like, cutting 35 pounds, like, you literally look like a Holocaust victim, like bones in your face and your hips, like the discipline it takes to do that. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And I don't know about some of you guys, but there's no more soul-cutting word to me than to be called the quitter. And she was right. I've been successful at professional things in my life, but when it came to the most important things, like being a husband, being a father, being that young 17-year-old kid that stood in those yellow footprints at Marine Corps boot camp, made a commitment to do something important with my life. I quit all those things, including my will to live. I'm a pretty radical decision maker. That's kind of my personality. I'm either all in or all out. So in that moment, I'm like, I need to fix this. I need to get back in the fight. The one thing I knew was that I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I'd surrounded myself by. I had systematically surrounded myself by people that told me everything I wanted to hear and not what I needed to hear. And I needed to hear some very hard things. And the people in my gym kind of elevated me and lifted me up, and so I pushed that accountability out of my life, and I needed that accountability. So I asked my wife, is there someone at this church you're going to, some man that could hold me accountable to making a decision to get well? I didn't care about God. I was so just hard at that time. I didn't care about God. I didn't want anything to do with church, but I just want someone outside of my circle. So I meet this guy named Steve Toth. He's elder on call at the church. He wasn't an MMA fighter. He was never served in the military. He just happened to be the guy on call. Sit across the table from him at a Starbucks coffee shop and had written a 5-paragraph order, a military operational order, for those that don't know, of how I was going to fix my life. And it was really good, by the way. I was super impressed by myself. And I was like, and I slid it over to him because my mindset was, because I was so manipulative, I was like, I wanted him to show it to my wife so she could see I was serious, and then we brush everything under the rug and move over because that's how men think. And he this guy has ADD like so bad. Like I slid it over to him and he didn't even read it. He slides it back over to me and tells me, hey, you're going to fail. You're going to fall right back on your face. And I'm like, why would you say that? Like, I'm showing you effort. And I'll never forget what he did. He tapped on that paper and he said, if this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to let you waste mine. And that was exactly what I needed to hear because, look, I tried everything. I've been on the medication. I've been through counseling from the VA, from civilian programs. I had professional success. I had financial success. My ego was rebuilt by accolades and all that stuff. Some of those things are good and some of those things are bad, but none of those things changed my situation. I was still in the same exact situation. And everybody knows the definition of idiocracy, right? It's you try the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result. That's what I was doing. And I'm like, I knew deep down I'd never really given God a chance to bring restoration in that situation. It was kind of one of those moments like, what do you really have to lose? You tried everything else. You're ready to die. Like, what do I have to lose? It was, my rock bottom. Turns out, rock bottom is a pretty good foundation to rebuild your life on. And so I decided to trust this guy, Steve. I surrendered my life to Christ. I didn't really even know what it meant at the time. I didn't really understand it. I just knew that I just had to take a step forward and try that. I had to finally recognize that how critical of an X I was on and then make a decision to step off of it. And beyond that decision to surrender my life to Christ, Steve Toth discipled me for a period of a year. And that was so instrumental in my life, beyond making that decision, to really help me understand what the decision I made was and how to actually live it out. And in retrospect to that year, what I really discovered was all these bad things that happened to me, beginning with my childhood, losing Foster, losing 15 friends, all the stuff I went through in Afghanistan and life, like as bad as those things were, those things, and I just shared some of them with you, by the way, as bad as those things were, those things did not lead me to be in that closet with my pistol in my hand. What led me there were the choices that I made in response to those things. And the realization of that made me realize, like, okay, those things didn't cause these problems. My choices did. I was just making bad choices. So now I need a blueprint to make better choices. And just so happens the Bible has a pretty good blueprint for doing that. A lot of people say, I hear, life doesn't come in a handbook. No, it actually does. We just don't read it. Sometimes Kathy will buy that IKEA furniture. Some of you guys know, right? And I'll get it, and I don't read the instructions. I put it together, and at the end, there's like 4 extra pieces of wood and some extra screws, and I'm like, and then the thing's like wobbly, and I'm like, why'd you buy this junk? Like, no, it's not junk. You just didn't read the instructions. But that's our life. Like, our life, we're like, why is my life so messed up? Well, we just didn't read the instructions, right? We didn't read the handbook. And the Bible provides that for us. And so did I still get angry? Did I still get anxiety? Did I still have, I did. A lot of bad things happened to me. But I was able to go back to the handbook and read the scenarios of how to make better choices. And I became very intentional about that. And by being intentional about that and making better choices, the results were different. And I found restoration in my life. And I have 4 kids now, 3 adult kids who 2 of them have went in the Marine Corps, 2 of them went to Bible college. They're all married, have 4 grandkids, 1 on the way. And then last year, if you might think I'm crazy for this, because we were 6 years empty nesting, we adopted our 4th daughter, Summer. She's 18 months old now, and she was our niece. And so our family's just there's so much restoration and blessings in our family. And we found restoration in my own brokenness. I found hope again, and ultimately I found what I've sought my whole life, and that's purpose. We were created to have purpose. Whether you here as a guest and don't believe in God or not in a relationship with Christ, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you were created to have purpose. Mark Twain says this, one of my favorite quotes. He says, the 2 most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day that they find out why. And when I stepped in a relationship with Christ and followed the leadership of Steve Toth through the discipleship process, I found out the why. And part of it's being here with you today, sharing, our testimony. I mean, look, the Revelations makes it pretty clear that the enemy has a plan to destroy us, and God gives us simple, like we try to figure it out, but God gives us a simple 2-step plan to combat the enemy's plan to destroy us. One is the blood of the Lamb, which is already done, right? Jesus died on the cross for us. That's already done. And number 2 is the word of our testimony. Right? When we experience that salvation ourselves, we have to provide that testimony. And so part of my purpose is being here with you today. And discovering that, like, God put this deep burden in my heart to pay it forward. It wasn't something I wanted to do. Like, it was like I had to do it. Imagine, like, having cancer and somebody gives you the cure, secretly gives you the cure across the coffee table at Starbucks. You can't keep that to yourself. Like, you have to share it. So I felt obligated to share it, knowing that other veterans were taking their lives, knowing that other people were divorcing at a rate of 80% in our combat veteran community. Like, I'm like, I have to share this. And so that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation. And over the last 14 years, I've been able to do that to our military, first responder communities, and in churches all over. And I'll just go real quick through some of the pictures of Mighty Oaks. We do these resiliency events on bases around the world. It's amazing. Last year we had 497 requests from bases for our team to go speak. I've spoken to about 500,000 troops. And we get to go in against secular, mandatory environments that are not by the chaplaincy all the time, but sometimes by the command. Like 1st Marine Division, division commander, all hands. And I get to go and share the gospel there. We've given 300,000 copies of our books to our troops. Then we have a recovery program called a legacy program. We have 6 ranches around the country: California, Ohio, Virginia, Texas. So we have 2 in Texas, and now Oklahoma this year. And you go to the next page. And at these programs, we bring active duty service members and orders by all 4 branches, by the way, to a faith-based program. We bring veterans, first responders, spouses. We pay for everything, about $8 million a year in programming. By the way, brought to by a grateful nation and churches like this that, part of bringing me here and the support that church has given. And if you don't know, Pastor Clay and this church has supported us through bringing me here, goes to this and getting these service members the help they need. And we have had about 7,000 graduates from this program, but now we're doing about 1,000 per year. And again, we pay for everything. And the successes that we've had through this, you go to the next slide, brought us to a third thing we do, and that's advocacy. So I have served under President Trump as the chairman for the White House's Faith-Based Coalition on Veterans Affairs to make sure that our VA offers faith-based solutions and options to our veterans. Now, it's not a competition against clinical programs or faith-based programs. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be an and. But if anybody, right, should get a right to choose what kind of care they get, it should be our warriors. And politically, it's been a battle, which is insane to me. And so we get to go before Congress. I've testified before Congress a dozen times now in Senate. Next month, I'm going to start chairing another congressional committee to make sure that our warriors get faith-based programs. We use the successes of Mighty Oaks as an antidote to prove that it's successful. And so we're in D.C. fighting for that. The next picture is our international program. So we take our warriors in this next, and I'm going to really talk about it in the next message, if you guys stay, which I encourage you to stay, of how our Mighty Oaks alumni, the graduates who had no purpose, want to die, are now going overseas and taking the same successful things that we've done with us U.S. service members and taking them overseas to our allied partners around the world. And we've done some incredible things with that. I'll talk briefly in the beginning of the next message on the rescue in Afghanistan, where I went back to get Aziz and his wife and kids during the Afghanistan evacuation. And ultimately, God performed a miracle, and we rescued 17,000 people from there. So we've went I'll talk about going into Ukraine and the things we've done in Ukraine, things our team has done in Ukraine. It's absolutely incredible to see whether you agree with Ukraine or not. I'll address that, but the work that our warriors that found restoration got to do in Ukraine is just incredible. Some more pictures up here, and this is some of our team and myself and our team in Ukraine, and we'll talk about all this in the next service. But and you guys could hold off on the last pictures because it'll be for the next service. So I'll start off with that. But regardless of where you're in your life, if you're on the X, have been on the X. If you're on the X now, if not, you're gonna be on the X, right? The way forward, and we're all looking for a way forward. We're all looking for plan and purpose in our life, regardless you're Christian or not. It starts with a relationship with God. Like in ministry, I hear it all the time. Like people look at kind of what I do and some of our team does, and they're like, man, I wish I had purpose like that. I wish I had a mission like that. You do. Oftentimes we spend our whole life though trying to step in our own purpose and our own mission, missing the very point that all we have to do is step in God's plan and God's purpose and God's mission. Jeremiah 20:11 calls it clear. He has a plan and purpose for each of our lives. And we get so distracted by the hardship and realize that sometimes the hardship is actually part of our purpose. I've come to this realization that all these bad things that happen to me, I don't regret any of them, even the loss of dear friends, because those things have allowed me to be in a position to minister to the most broken in our service members. And these chaplains will tell you, I love and appreciate what they do, but sometimes their voice goes on deaf ears to the troops. Sometimes they need to hear from another service member who has suffered the same thing they have. And that works for me too, right? If we have somebody struggling with alcoholism or I can't speak on that. I'm just not equipped to speak on that. I'm like, stop. That's it. You still dealing with alcohol? Stop. You dealing with drugs? Stop. I have to find somebody that has struggled with that to bring to them. And so sometimes our hardship and our pain is something that God maybe didn't do to us, right? I don't think God does these things to us. he didn't kill my friends or anything like that, but he allows us to go through them. Why does he allow us to go through them, right? Could he stop them? Of course he could stop them. He hung the universe. Why does he allow us to go through them? Because he trusts us with those experiences to use them for his glory and to bring restoration hope to others. And so I look at the things I've been through and I'm like, praise God that I went through those things, because it's put me in a position to equip me to be able to minister to the most vulnerable, to talk about my experiences and help point them to the real solution, which is a relationship with Jesus. And if anybody here is listening, especially those visiting not in a relationship with Christ, if you want a purpose for your life, if you want to be who you're created to be, it has to start with a relationship with the Creator. You can't be who you were created to be without knowing the Creator, right? That's where it begins. And by the way, there's no shortcut for that. There's no other way around. That's it. That's the only way to do it. And, I'll end with this because I'm already over my time. Most of us complicate that so much of stepping into a relationship with God. And I go back, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, go back to stepping in a relationship with God and how complicated this theology and all these different churches. I love that this is a non-denominational church, because sometimes religion and denominations really complicate the most simple thing and the most essential thing, and that is a relationship with Jesus. I mean, if you think of the thief on the cross, right? Jesus on the cross, the thief on the cross is there, and he lays over to Jesus, asks for help, and he says, take him with him. And Jesus says, assuredly, today you'll be with me in paradise. That's a really powerful thing when it comes to stepping in a relationship with Jesus, because, by the way, this man never said a sinner's prayer. He never got baptized. He wasn't on the softball team at his local church, right? He didn't go catechism or anything like that. All the thief did was acknowledge that Jesus was Lord. And he's with Jesus for eternity in paradise. So we complicate it sometimes. We think I'm not good enough or whatever. It's as simple as acknowledging Jesus is Lord, submitting your life to him, and stepping in a relationship with him. Step in a relationship with the Creator to be who you're created to be. And that's the most essential X that you'll ever step off of. So I hope you guys will stay for the second one, because I'm super excited for the second one. And I just want to see standing room only. But all right, let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for Pastor Clay and Celine and Ike for bringing me here, Lord. Thank you for these chaplains and the brave work they do, selflessly sacrificing themselves to go all over the world to just share you with our warriors, Lord. I thank you for this congregation, this community. Lord, I don't know any of these people, what they're dealing with. I don't know what X's there are in their life, Lord, but you do. You know what each and every one of them are struggling with, Lord. I pray you will encourage them to step off that X, and most importantly, step off that X into a relationship with you, so they could be who you created them to be and do the things you created them to do. I thank for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.